Nothing's going your way. You've had a bad day. It's good to keep it simple. Michelle and Seth say take a deep breath from fade to gray. It's mental.
Welcome to another mental episode. How are you doing, Michelle?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. It's
See, now what's funny is we both said the same thing and we both know that's not true.
It's like
for either of us.
I'm great. Things are swell in the world. It's a great time to be alive.
Okay, this is not church, okay? We don't have to put on our best face here. We can just be honest and
we can be real. We can be honest.
We can be real. I think we should, in all honesty. I think we should.
I mean, it's one of my main things. It's all about being genuine and authentic.
Yeah, me too. But, you still want to put your best foot forward. You still want people to look at you and think nicely of you. So,
yeah, well, that's all going to go the other way today.
I agree. It is. That's just the way it goes. But that's okay because it's real.
Mm-hmm. So Michelle, you mentioned imposter syndrome to me. It was actually something you brought up, which was interesting because I had just read a book on it a few months prior. So the irony there. But what kind of drew you into imposter syndrome? Like what is this?
I actually heard it mentioned somewhere and I did not know what it was, to be honest. I mean, and here I'm doing all this study into psychology and everything, and it's not mentioned there.
Right.
And I think I mentioned that before. It's not in the diagnostic manual.
Like it's not in the DSM-5. No. I have never heard of that.
No. But it was something that I heard in a conversation or a video somewhere. I honestly do not remember the actual source, but I was like, what is that? And then I went and kind of, did a quick gloss over, little Google search on it and said, okay, what is this imposter syndrome? And I think I told you that when I read the description, I kind of put my head down and cried because I thought, oh my God, this is me. Mm-hmm. Like to a T. Mm-hmm. And I think I even mentioned to you there was a little test that you could take to see how much you suffered from imposter syndrome. And I think I was like off the charts. I was 100%. Like if I could have gone above that, I think I would have. And so it became something that I got pretty interested in. And I think it's so funny because when I brought it up and you had purchased books, I had just purchased books on it.
Oh, really?
So I think we were already in sync.
Yes.
So I think that is divine intervention, if you will, that this is a subject matter that probably is necessary. Because if you're working in the mental health field and I'm studying in the mental health field and neither one of us knew what it was, there's a real good chance that a lot of people out there that are feeling this way have never heard of that either.
Right. So let's just bring it out of the bag because we can talk around it, but let's just name this for what it is. At its core, imposter syndrome is this persistent inability to feel as if your success is derived or is legitimate. By derived, I mean deserved.
Right.
So it's this fear of like, you are not good enough.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think most people will admit that at some point in their life they have felt that way. And I would even go so far as to say that I think it's probably normal to not feel that way sometimes. To
some degree, yes.
Right. But when it becomes persistent, when it becomes an overriding fear that you live, within its grasp, then now it's become a problem.
Right.
And I think studies have shown that it is very persistent for a lot of people. But again, it comes back to that idea that we want our best foot forward. So we try to ignore all of these negative voices and self-talk going on inside of our own heads. And we convince ourselves that we're just being dramatic or we're just being emotional or, all those little adjectives that get thrown at us that cause a lot of self-doubt, which only furthers this, quite ironically. But yeah, and I think you had mentioned before on the last mental episode, you had said, well, what is that? Is that a fear of rejection? And I think at its core, it actually is, at least for most people, it is for me, a fear of rejection.
Fear of what other people are going to think, or that your success is not good. I mean, again, I'm coming right back to not good enough.
Right.
So much of my life has been centered around this fear, this core fear that I am not going to measure up. I am somehow not good enough. And so when I came across imposter syndrome, I read the definition and I was like, that's interesting. I can identify with all of that, even within recent events. But let's kind of talk about what is it that causes this? Why don't we feel good enough?
I think to some degree it's a measure of self-confidence, self-image issues. And I think most people will, again, admit to some level of not having a great self-image all the time. I mean, the opposite of that, of course, is narcissism, where you are convinced that you are absolutely the greatest. But even that, at its essence, at its core, is a fear, is the result of rejection. That's where narcissism comes from. So you're talking about two different extremes in the response to the same stimuli, basically. Some people go so far one way as to say, I'm the greatest thing that's ever walked the planet. Nobody does anything better than me. I'm the best at everything I try, to the other end of the spectrum where you doubt everything you've ever done that you say. Even academic achievements or, athletic achievements, whatever the case may be, you end up in a place where none of that is ever good enough. There's a sense of perfectionism that goes along with it. And that negative self-speak tells you constantly, I did not do this well enough. I have to pretend that I'm okay, but I'm just waiting for somebody to agree with me that I didn't do it well enough. And then I don't know, it's basically a fear of sitting around waiting for somebody to tell you how awful you are. Which is horrible.
Yes. But that's what I think, at least in because I'm going to not talk from like a social work perspective. I'm talking from real life because this is something that really does impact me. And I think over the years, I've discovered that I am a validation junkie, that like I have to have this like a form of validation in order to be okay. Even like in my job in social work and some of the things that I've done for a living has always kind of come with this constant feedback loop, which if you're doing a good job and you're actually helping people, you get that validation, right?
Right.
But at its core, I'm seeking this validation because there is this root fear that somehow I am going to be found out. That even though I've gone to school, even though I've gotten these degrees, right? Maybe somehow I'm not competent. Maybe somehow I'm not good enough. Maybe I should have tried harder. Maybe I needed to, spend another year at it or done another internship. There's somehow this fear that I will not measure up. Is that something you've ever experienced?
Oh my gosh, every single day of my life.
Let's talk about
it. Well, like I said, it's a self-image issue. And so if you have a poor self-image, or you've received a lot of negative feedback in your life, there's that constant sense of self-evaluation happening. Ironically, that I have almost felt is almost narcissistic in its interpretation as well. That you're so focused on yourself that you are not capable, but it's not a positive self-focus. It's a negative self-focus. But it does impede your ability to actually function healthy within your chosen field or within your relationships or whatever the case may be. So you tend to end up self-evaluating everything to the nth degree. It's almost paralysis by analysis. Like
the fact that you just said paralysis, I was going to jump on. I was going to be like, it's paralyzing.
Yes.
It's demobil. Like it will stop you in your tracks, and you don't know what to do.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I think I shared with you the last time I had this book written and I was supposed to be sending it into a publisher, and I kept going back to it. I just kept going, like, there has to be something more I can fix. There has to be something more I can say. I have to go back and evaluate it because maybe I'm wrong here. And so there was this analyzing sense of analyzation to what I had written. even though the perspective that I was writing from was purely anecdotal to my experience. So yes, I did bring in psychological concepts into the conversation and I explained some of them, but it was purely how all of this had affected me. And yet I was still trying to make it perfect as though my experience was not valid.
Right. It's almost saying your story isn't good enough. Your story is not valid in and of itself, that it somehow needs to change or be improved.
Yeah. But again, self-image. It comes back to believing the negative self-talk that others have presented to you or that you are presenting to yourself. And so you've come to the table basically with an expectation of negativity. And you're just waiting for somebody to confirm it. And it's a horrible fear. I mean, if we want to get into the comorbid things that come up along with it, we'd have to look at anxiety. We'd have to look at depression. We'd have to look at, these oversensitizing things that we feel as apprehension. And I don't even know if that's strong enough language for some people, because we're all going to experience this again at different levels. Mine is pretty severe as I look at it anyway. But now I'm deeply competitive, so mine may be just the best form of imposter syndrome.
So I recently took on a new job, all right? And whenever I do that, whenever there's a big transition in my life, I always have this sense that at least for like the first, 3 to 6 months, that a shoe is going to drop. It's just kind of constantly waiting of what's going to happen next. I'm going to be found out. To the point where it can be paralyzing, not just at work, but also at home.
Well, yeah. And you tend to live your life then from a place of anxiety, waiting for that to happen.
Where it's constantly on your mind. And what's interesting is no matter how much I think about it or anyone in the situation thinks about the problem, it's not going to fix it or solve it in that moment. And so it's like this constant waiting game, which I think imposter syndrome really plays out in people's lives, where it's totally paralyzing, as you were saying. So, yeah.
And again, because it's not generally something that only applies to one area of your life. Typically, if you're dealing with it, it's from multiple areas.
Right.
And so the more things that you are involved with, the more activities, the more things that you've attempted, the more of that negative expectation is going to be evident in your life, which of course can cause all kinds of problems. I mean, we're just talking about, apprehension or anxiety levels. We're not even talking about what the physical response is to that kind of stuff, from a physical perspective, like what is stress doing to your body. We're talking mostly just from the mental health perspective, and it all goes together. So it can be very damaging across the board.
Oh, agreed. And I'm going to read this definition again. It's the persistent inability to believe that one's success is deserved or has been legitimately achieved as a result of one's own efforts or skills. And I wanted to read that because of that last part, efforts or skills.
Right.
Really, when you were mentioning this but talking about self-doubt, and that it really causes one to question their own worth.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I'll give you an example. I've worked for a long time now on educational pursuits. I started a little later in life, but for the last 10 years, almost solid, it has been one educational pursuit after another. Because of my personality, I've done the go to college thing and sit in a classroom with a bunch of people. I'm not good at it. I don't have a lot of patience for other people, to be honest. So if somebody is not up to speed with the rest of the class, I tend to get very frustrated. So it's just not a good thing. I don't play well with others. And I am introverted. So the online format has been fantastic for me. That's how I've managed to do all of my educational pursuits past junior college. However, one of the things that I came across was, at the time I was beginning, not many schools, like state schools or universities or whatever, were offering the online format for more than maybe 1 or 2 classes. So you had to go to a school that became their priority, like a University of Phoenix is one of the main ones. And so I chose to go there. That's what I chose to do. I could do the classes quicker. I didn't have to go sit in a classroom. I could if I wanted to because they allowed for both, but I wanted the online experience. So I did all of this only to, at one point, hear a comment from somebody that that's not real education. And so because of that, immediately I started questioning my choices. So even though by that point, I had earned my Bachelor's of Science degree in accounting, I didn't feel like it really mattered. Like it wasn't up to par with everybody else that had probably gotten the same degree. Because mine came from an institution that, it's for profit, which apparently is a bad thing. And so I struggled with that. I still struggle with that. I most often don't tell people where I went to school because for whatever reason, I feel as though they're going to tell me, well, that's not a real education then. And I can try and justify it in my mind. I have the arguments. Well, look, that education allows me to sit for nationally recognized exams that allow me professional certifications. So of course it's real education, but it's still somehow not good enough in my mind. And the same is true with the way I'm working on my doctorate. It's going to, it gives me all the education I need to get licensed to be a clinical counselor. But yet there's this doubt in the back of my mind that it's not, well, it's not a real school, but it is. So it's irrational. It's completely irrational. But yet I still feel that all the time. I still feel and keep waiting for somebody to say, well, yeah, you took a few classes, but those aren't real classes. Except I did a lot of damn work.
Yes, you did. It's evident. You wrote a book. Right.
And so why? Well, see, and again, my first reaction there is to discount that. And my husband, who just came in, by the way, would probably be one of the first to say, stop doing that. Because you are diminishing your own achievements. Yeah. And why? I mean, how many people, now this is going to sound rude. I don't mean it in a rude, but in a generalized sense, how many people are sitting on their asses not educating themselves at all? Now, if that's your choice, that's cool. But those people are often the most vocal with telling you how you're not doing something well enough. Or I should say good enough. See, there's my lack of education.
Lack of education. Can you just name the degrees really quickly? Just to put this out there. Just to,
Well, I mean, I have that magic little 2-year degree when I first started.
It is a degree.
Which I don't even really count. But it's real. It is a degree. Yeah, I have an associate's degree in general education. I have a bachelor's degree, a Bachelor of Science degree in accounting. I have a master's of business administration with a concentration in finance. And I'm now working on a doctorate in psychology. I'm also working on a dual program of a bachelor's master's program in biblical studies and general Christian counseling. But again, it's not from a real seminary.
So does it count?
I don't know that it counts.
Probably not.
So yeah, you see, I keep trying. So there's this need to continue to achieve, to try and prove yourself.
Love where you go, because that's right where I'm going. Because what I was about.
My
next point was it's kind of like always feeling like on a hamster wheel. Like there is no I have arrived. It's this, there's one thing. It's like, I get there. Okay. So what's the next? And there's this constant need to approve. And that's where my validation comes in, because getting those achievements, getting those things, getting that wheel to move is fun, but it's kind of I don't end up going anywhere. Right.
I know. Or the next thing is always on the horizon and you have no chance to celebrate your accomplishments so far.
Correct.
Nor do you allow yourself.
So self-care is also diminished. It's as if no matter what you do is ever good enough, so you can never sit back and relax. It's almost impossible, because there's either a sense of the shoe is about to drop and everything's going to fall apart, or I'm just never going to get there. Right.
Yeah, it's very demoralizing, in all honesty. I mean, you feel good for a second or two. When I got that bachelor's degree, I took a big, deep breath and I went, oh, this is so great. But then immediately my mind started turning maybe I should do more education. Maybe this isn't good enough. Now, ironically, the reason that I decided to go get that bachelor's degree is because of my business. I've had my business for 20 years. I do nothing differently now having that degree than I did before I had the degree. But for whatever reason, although there are extenuating circumstances in the business world, I felt as though I needed more clout. I needed some letters behind my name to prove that I was good enough at what my business did.
There is
Yes.
some having
Yes.
those letters behind your name do make you,
Of course.
I don't know what, official.
Well, that's what you want to
Right.
feel. You want to feel official. You want to feel as though, you're recognized as an authority on a subject matter or something. But I can tell you firsthand, I work with a lot of people with a lot of letters behind their name, and I have a lot more experience than they do. I have a lot more knowledge than they do.
Correct.
I'm actually answering their questions, and yet I'm still seen as, oh, well, you're just this. And it gets even worse when you bring in gender stereotypes into the business world. Because I can work with the same client and give them the same advice, but they will instinctively want to talk to a man to hear the same thing.
Is that why you're a bodybuilder?
No, I don't think that has anything to do with it. I just like it.
Okay. Well, I was, that's one way of compensating.
Well, maybe. I mean, maybe subconsciously, I don't know. I can tell you this, I never feel good enough at that either. So, I mean, like I said, it's all negative self-talk about everything.
Please know that your co-host does not frequently exercise. His only beverage that he drinks is Diet Pepsi. He eats Tostino's pizza.
Oh, God, I miss pizza.
Let's this, everyone, Michelle is a bodybuilder. Legitimately. Competes in competitions.
See, I get all squeamy about that, legitimately. Well, who decides that?
The pictures that I have seen on Facebook legitimize that. But it's funny because I have a coach and she got very frustrated with me not too long ago because I would post a picture or a video of, what I was working on, and I would have to diminish it somehow. I'd say, well, oh, my legs look good here, but yeah, the shoulders really need work or whatever, And finally she called me one day and she's like, you got to stop it. I don't want to hear another damn negative thing about yourself out of your mouth. She said, it's ridiculous. And I said, I know, I'm so bad at it. And I don't know how to make it stop. She goes, you are your own worst enemy. You have to stop. Right.
And she's right. I get that. So I quit saying it out loud, but those voices still go on in my head on a loop. So when you say I'm a legitimate bodybuilder, I'm waiting for somebody to go, well.
Okay. Well, anytime that you feel like you are not legitimate as a bodybuilder, I would like you to call your co-host and get on Zoom, and you will feel restored that you are most certainly miles down the path.
Okay, now see, that's your negative self-talk.
It doesn't matter if it boosts yours. I'm okay with it.
Oh, that's very sacrificial of you.
You know what? I'm such the martyr. So...
Oh my goodness.
Well, let's talk a little bit about self-talk, specifically negative self-talk, because I have a lot of it, and I love here, I'm a mental health professional, but I don't really always take great care of my mental health, which is also what's going to make this podcast fun. But in talking about negative self-talk, I often just let it go, and I just let those voices run, because it seems like so much work to keep up with them.
Yeah, it is. I mean, well, positive self-talk, negative self-talk, it's all work. You're having to you're basically trying to convince yourself of what you're saying. And then ironically, you trust you more than anybody else. So you start to believe the actual words that you're saying. So if they're negative, you're going to believe them.
Right.
If they're positive, you're going to believe them. But how often is that happening?
Correct. So recently, as by recently, I mean the last 48 hours, I was in a conversation with the co-host of Fade to Gray, the Fade to Gray podcast. And they were providing a compliment to me. And in that compliment was a couple things that, probably could have been done better or been done differently. And all I could hear was the negative, to the point that they had to come back around and restate things in the positive. It's interesting how one can often completely miss the positive and only find the negative.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they were trying to use, there's that age-old, what is it called, the sandwich method or something like that.
It's horrible. It does not work.
Yeah, because people only key in on the negative stuff in the middle.
Correct. Yeah, positive, negative, positive does not work. We just focus on the negative in the middle.
Yeah. Again, human nature
Correct.
Or conditioning. We've been conditioned to think that way. And so, and I'm going to bring in a subject here because I think it applies.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had this discussion with other people in the past surrounding the idea of negative self-talk, or, in this case, imposter syndrome, the idea that we're constantly trying to validate our experience as authentic, as valuable. I keep coming back to this idea that I was raised, of course, in the Christian tradition, which told me that I was to always be humble.
Mm-hmm.
That was always told me that I had to think of others more highly than myself.
Correct.
That I was as dirty rags.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's all of these ideas embedded inside the tenets of Christianity that tell you that you're supposed to be less than, or that you just are less than. And I think it starts causing a problem in our brain somehow.
Well, we have, in order for our Savior to be great, we must be bad. Like, that's the only way this works, really.
Right. Well, so but should it be greater by comparison or just great because he is? And so I think that's what happens is we start living from a place of comparison immediately, and we're taught to, and we're rooted in that idea
from birth.
Or whenever you're introduced to that subject. But the idea that for the longest time, I sang for years and years.
Mm-hmm.
I have, anybody that talks to me knows I have a big loud voice. I can project well, and I sang, and I did a fairly decent job of it. And that's me diminishing again, because it doesn't feel comfortable to say, hey, I was a good vocalist, but I am a good vocalist, or I was. I haven't sang now in a long time, but the idea that it was so uncomfortable for me, especially like in a church setting, when people would come up and give me a compliment. It felt inauthentic to accept that compliment. Instead, that's accepting glory for myself. No, all glory belongs to God.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't accept that. It was incredibly uncomfortable. But I do remember when we would have guests come in to sing or whatever, automatically comparing myself to them as I'm not as good as, or, oh boy, I hope I don't have to sing in front of them because they're going to realize I'm not really a vocalist. So again, back to the imposter stuff, the idea that we're still trying to prove some kind of value to what we bring to the table as it's compared to somebody that we deem as actually authentic or valuable.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that's a value judgment. I mean, I've had lots of people that I've looked up to in all aspects of my life, in business, in sports, in church, or whatever. And I've had other people say, oh, I don't think they're that good. And I'm like, what? That's who I'm comparing myself to. So if they're not that good, oh my gosh.
Right.
So it becomes this very dangerous game we play with our own mental health.
You mentioned this earlier, and I'm going to come back around on it. The piece around perfectionism, because that fell both within my church experience, but then also kind of the reckoning of all the mental health crap, to where there's this constant need to try to be perfect so that I can be fitting or worthy of God. That whole works-based salvation kind of fell right in line with that. And I think for a lot of people can get stuck there, where they're just in this constant cycle, where they just never feel good enough. And it's just absolutely tragic.
Yeah, it is. Because, first of all, if you truly believe that you're in need of a savior, you already recognize you're not perfect, or you wouldn't need him.
Correct.
I mean, so I don't know why it's so difficult for us to say, I'm okay just the way I am. Flaws and all. I'm okay. But we all have a difficult time doing that. So I don't think it's God we're trying to prove it to. I think it's each other that we're trying to prove it to.
Prove what?
Our worth.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think God is confused on our worth. I don't think he's ever been confused. I think we're confused on our worth. And we question why we should be worth anything to God. I don't think God in any way, shape, or form has ever been confused on that subject matter.
In talking about worth and where we find it, how does one, and I asked this question on Facebook, but I feel like this is falling right in line. How does one shift that finding their worth, their validation in the opinions of others, i.e. this imposter syndrome we're talking about, to shifting it to something more internal? And I hate the answer God, because that doesn't work for me anymore. It's an unsatisfactory answer.
Well, yeah, because what if you don't believe in God?
Correct. And even
how do I find my value through the eyes of God if I don't believe God exists?
Or you just believe that God has very much disappointed you, even. Like, of course, even your opinion around God can be shifted by that. So
I don't know. I gave you a very pithy response to that. I saw that question. I gave you a very pithy response. So it's all very surface level. I mean, what are you going to do on a Facebook post? You're not going to do a counseling session. But the idea is the idea of wanting to encourage. And I do believe, I mean, I referenced the idea that we spend too much time worrying about what other people's opinions are and not enough worrying about what our own opinions are. Mm-hmm. And I do believe that's true. I think that we put far too much value on other people's ideas of what we're supposed to look like rather than enough value on what our idea of what we're supposed to look like is. I said that very awkwardly, but if I'm more concerned with what you think of me than what I think of me, I have a problem.
Yes. Inherently.
Because I have to live with me all the time.
Correct.
You may just be somebody passing along
mm-hmm.
or for a period of time in our lives or our experience. But I have to live with me all the time. So my opinion of myself should be pretty darn important. But it rarely is.
Mm-hmm.
Rarely. So I don't know how you make that shift other than it is a constant exercise in positive self-talk and affirmation. I worked with a life coach for a while, and I'm a certified life coach. It's not a good advertisement.
It's some things behind your name. There's some initials for that.
Well, yeah, there's
some letters.
There's some achievement there. It was a year-long project to get to that, so it wasn't some little, $29.99 course on the internet. Not that there's anything wrong with that. If that's what you want to do, be my guest. But no, I had to hit that gold standard because that's who I am. Mm-hmm. And, but even working with a life coach myself, I found myself constantly irritated because he wanted me to only practice, positive self-talk. He wanted me to write affirmations every day and breathe them in and breathe them out. And at first I really chafed against that because I was like, this is stupid. Like, I don't understand the value of this. And it took me a while of actually doing it before it actually started to make a little bit of sense. And then after it started to make a little bit of sense, it took even longer for me to start seeing results from it.
Mm-hmm. Takes time.
The unfortunate part of that is if you stop doing it, you kind of lose traction because that negative voice is so much stronger.
Yeah.
And so you have to kind of stick to that agreement with yourself that this is the only way I'm going to speak to myself or about myself.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's good stuff.
Okay, now I shared with you my imposter syndrome. I need to hear what yours is.
Oh, well, on what degree?
You share whatever you feel confident sharing.
There's a lot. Which imposter are we speaking of? There are many. Most recently, I took a new role and took a pretty big leap for myself. And I stepped into a job where I'm really not doing the things that I used to. I have been dictated by a phone for the last 6 years. 4 years on a crisis line and now a year and a half with an insurance company. And every part of my life has always been controlled and dictated. Like I had things to numbers I needed to meet, expectations, needs, all of that has shifted into this new role. And suddenly the things by which I have used to determine my worth and my value, the amount of phone calls I take, the amount of crisis assessments I do, like all of these different things, it's all gone. It's changed. And so suddenly I have to step up to the plate, and I'm feeling very unqualified at the moment. Even though I have all of the qualifications, even though I have the character and the personality and the jokes and all of this stuff, like I have all of that. But I'm not
the jokes.
Well, think about it. Corporate training. You're with these people for 8 hours. 8 hours.
They're like, please tell me a joke.
Michelle,
please.
8 hours of me talking. You need humor. So
yes, you're right.
I have I have all of that. Like everything is here. All of the boxes are checked. But somehow I don't feel up to it. And I'm very excited for this job. I'm thrilled. I'm getting up early. I'm doing everything I can. But right now I'm going through this place where I'm really having to battle with myself and really kind of fight those negative voices, which is an easier thing to say than do. I'm discovering.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's true for everybody. We tend to feel like that's just us. But I think that across the board, if you were to ask or take a poll, most people would tell you the same thing.
Yeah.
Like they struggle with the same things, the negative self-talk. They struggle with, self-image or whatever. They're more than ready to believe the negative about themselves rather than the positive. So we all end up feeling like this is our personal tragedy that we're living, but yet it's a very common experience.
Yes. Well, I will say that I am finding that my imposter syndrome comes out the most during transitions.
Anything stressful, I would think.
Any transition, any like stressful event like that, specifically in relationship to employment or family relationships, things like that, often are going to draw this imposter syndrome out. At least it has for me.
Right. Well, actually, there's if you read through literature on imposter syndrome, one of the things they say is that there's several situations in which it's very prevalent. One of those is any kind of new environment, but an academic setting is high on the list.
Yep.
Workplace, high on the list. Social interactions and relationships. And when you stop and think about all of these things, they're all a place in which you want to put your best foot forward, so to speak. You want to be seen as attractive. You want to be seen as intelligent. You want to be seen as a good worker or, good at your job. So these are places where you're going to overcompensate in trying to achieve, but yet somewhere in the back of your mind is still going to be that doubt that is it enough so that these people find me attractive or intelligent or articulate or whatever the case may be. Is it enough? And almost without fail, always in our mind, it's never enough, or we wouldn't continue to try and overachieve.
Right.
I know for me too, even that word overachiever was something that people say to me often, and usually they kind of laugh about it and we make a joke about it. But that makes me feel very self-conscious. Like, oh, is that how they see me? Like I'm an overachiever. Maybe I'm talking too much about my achievements.
Right, it can go both ways. It's not,
you're all over the place with this.
There is no safe place. It's like, it's always grass is greener on the other side, or vice versa. It's always going to be coming from one or the other direction. It's not always one way.
But the common denominator in all of that, however, is our impression of what other people think. That's what it comes back to. And so again, it comes back to that fear of being rejected based on whatever parameter we're talking about. And so as it pertains to the workplace, we don't want to be rejected by an authority figure or a boss because we want to look good in our job, but more often than not, we're afraid we're going to lose our job.
Right.
Or somebody better will be assigned to our job and we'll lose our job because of that. So that's where it is. In academia, I'm constantly striving for that A.
Right.
Well,
it's not that hard.
There's
Michelle.
no other grade for me.
Right. And
what's that?
It's not that hard. Come on.
Oh my God, I'm doing statistics right now.
Oh, never mind. I take it back. I take it back. I hated that class.
God, I am not a fan of statistics.
Is it Excel statistics or is it normal statistics?
Yeah, no, it's not Excel. There's another program they're having me use. But, the first week I turned in an assignment and I had missed one on the assignment. And I went back and looked at it. I was like, no.
Fought it?
No.
Did you fight it?
No, I fought it. And I came back and he's like, you're absolutely right. I didn't look at it right. And I was like, hell yes. Now this last week, I got an 80%. I was pretty pissed. And I went back and looked at it and I'm like, okay, yeah, I screwed up there.
And that is why fighting every one of those points matters and counts.
Exactly. You never know.
Because you might, even
But
though
all I
it's
can think
99
of-
now, you don't know what the next one will be.
Well, exactly. And all I could think of is, look, out of the first 2 assignments, I was perfect. This third assignment, I got an 80%. Oh my God, it dropped my grade to a 91. Oh my God, that's too low.
Oh.
That's too low. It's too close to not having an A.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
What's going to happen?
And so you start mentally digging at yourself. You start mentally chastising yourself. Why are you not good at this? I mean, I'm sorry. Sometimes you're just not good at statistics. That's the way it is.
And that's okay. However, I don't know if that's okay as an accountant, but it is as a social worker. But
well, accounting's a different kind of numbers. So, and that makes sense to me. Statistics, I'm like, what the hell are we? I don't understand this.
Doing?
And of course, in behavioral sciences, statistics is only useful for when you're working on
data,
a dissertation idea. Like you're trying to confirm your dissertation.
Right.
Yeah, research. So, but I mean, how much research do you do once you have a license to be a clinical psychologist? Well, probably not much.
Unless you
read other people's.
Unless you decide to go work at like Washington University or some Ivy League school and do research as like a fellow.
No. But so I mean, we've shifted a little bit. I mean, that's what I'm talking about. It's the idea that you're constantly striving to be better. And there's just things that the reality is maybe you're not going to be good at. And that's okay because none of us are good at everything. Mm-hmm. But yet we want to try to be, And that's the other thing. I mean, that kind of responsibility was drummed into me from the time I was a small child. Like, you have to do your best. You have to be responsible. You have to, 110%, which I always laughed at because I'm like, that's just not.
B's were not okay.
No, ever.
Unless it was math. Unless it was math, I got a pass. But everything else, it had to be A's.
Well, I did that to my kids. I had high expectations for my kids. Now, look, I do believe that having high expectations for somebody is an okay thing. Mm-hmm. I do think people work up to an expectation. Mm-hmm. So as a parent, yes, I want my children to excel. Nobody ever got in trouble for a grade that I remember. But I would very jokingly say, and I do think on some level it bothered them now that they're adults, I'd catch little comments, but I would jokingly say, like, if they got an A-, I'd be like, minus? The hell? Where did the minus come from?
Yeah, you probably don't remember that. I bet you they do.
I bet they do too.
I bet they remember.
Well, but again, we tend to think that this is only about us. We forget that we're having an effect on people around us. Mm-hmm. Funny story. And it was something that made me shut up for a long time. When I was in junior college and I had to take a math class, we took a test and I got the test back. They're handing it back and your grade is in red on the paper. Mm-hmm. Hand me my test back. I got a 98. I was so pissed. I'm like so incredibly angry. And I said it out loud. I'm like, 98? Damn it. I'm not even kidding you. The lady sitting next to me reached over and angrily snatched my paper off the desk, slammed it down and started writing something on it and then threw it back at me.
What'd she write?
She wrote, 98 makes you human. Shut the hell up. I was like, oh, damn. My bad. I felt so bad. Because I was like, I'm so keyed into this is not my standard that I hurt somebody else's feelings. Who probably, I didn't even look at her paper. I have no idea what she got, but I don't think it was a 98.
Right.
But this is what this does to us. Mm-hmm. It creates the sense of competitive perfectionism.
And it makes us so successful, though. We're so successful, but we're so hollow and shallow as humans.
Yeah. I mean, we can be successful. We can, we can hit all the markers for achievement within our chosen field or our chosen activity. But you're right. At what cost mentally or to other people? But since we're talking about imposter syndrome, at what cost to us?
Mm-hmm.
I think we do damage to ourselves. I'm positive we do. I know I've done damage to myself. So,
well, I know that I will oftentimes, like, in the midst of feeling like an imposter, in the midst of not feeling good enough and kind of fighting things, that I will spiral at moments.
yeah.
Right. And it is not good. And oftentimes I will spiral over things that have not even happened and are not going to happen.
Yeah.
I have already grieved situations that have not even occurred. It's like I'm winning the game. I'm accomplishing things I don't even need to. It is wonderful. So one of the things I want in upcoming episodes for us to kind of unpack, now that we've both been a little honest about things that we're going through and how this affects us on the real, in real life.
Right.
What I'm hoping moving forward is that Michelle and I are going to do a little research. We're going to do a little reading, and we're going to talk about some things that are actually helpful for people. What do you think? Is that kind of your vision, Michelle?
Yeah.
That's mine.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because I'd like to get a little deeper into the subject matter. I'd like to understand it a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that surface level understanding already has me pegged. So I feel like, okay, the better I understand this, maybe the better I can be about handling it.
Right. The more I dig, the more I'll discover.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's too easy to sit and think about, well, let's talk about mental health issues and kind of divorce ourselves from the reality of their effect on our life as well. So I think this is a good thing to do, is to be vulnerable and say, no, I struggle with this.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm telling people of my achievements, it's not actually bragging. It's trying to remind myself that I've done good things.
Right.
I'm trying to believe that, and to support one another, not just you and I, but the people listening, because they need to know there's other people out there that are struggling with the same thing, so that you can talk about it and it's not taboo.
Mm-hmm.
That this is something that other people can relate to and respond to, so that there's a sense of working through a problem together,
And that's what we want to be about.
That's what I want to be about for sure. So.
Me too.
Hey, these are the movies that molded me.
What's up, podcast listeners? This is Elizabeth.
And this is Chris.
What's going on? It's Omar here from Movies That Molded Me.
What is Movies That Molded Me?
It's the most fun podcast around.
It's a movie ranking game show where we take our favorite movies from a specific topic or genre and play against each other to create the definitive top 5 list.
Where can we find Movies That Molded Me?
So you can find us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
Check it out. It's a lot of fun.
You need to listen to our show.